Welcome to the 2-Minute Warning interview, where we dive into what's next and most importantly, what should be next in the global energy transition. My name is 𝗣𝗲𝗡𝗏𝗏. I'm the director of the Energy Transition Dialogues, and I'm delighted to welcome 𝗖𝗢𝗣𝗮𝗀𝗡 with us. He is chair at the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy, also known, of course, as 𝗖𝗢𝗣𝗮𝗮𝗀, and now is also special advisor on hydrogen at the IEA. And he is also an advisor at 𝗣𝗲𝗄𝗃. So a lot of titles there to keep you busy, Noah.
That's right. That's right.
Well,
Happy to be with you today, Michelle.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. I imagine it's a very busy time, so shortly after the release of the World Energy Outlook report, and then with the world's biggest climate-related gathering kicking off in a few days, I imagine your diary is quite full.
Yes, it's indeed quite busy, but yeah, really exciting and important times for the world, obviously.
It's very, very important. And let's just touch on that report, the World Energy Outlook. So that showed, just in a very, very quick summary for our listeners, that the new energy economy is emerging. Of course, we've all seen this in the digital and ink headlines over the last 18 months especially, but it's not emerging quickly enough to reach those net zero goals by 2050. On one hand, we have soaring renewable energy deployments, yet we have the world's consumption of coal growing strongly and CO2 emissions at their highest annual increase, second largest increase in history. What do you think that this mixed message is going to have on the discussions at COP next week?
Well, I think it's kind of another wake-up call, if we needed any, that yes, the good news is, things are moving, things are changing. So I think we should not lose sight of that in terms of that policies are changing, strategies of companies are changing. So there, the transformation or the energy transition is definitely underway. It is beginning. It is starting to make inroads, but unfortunately, and that's kind of the bad news. Indeed. The challenge that we have, the objectives that we set ourselves, that we need to set ourselves for 2050, this famous net zero emissions in 2050, they are so huge, they are so enormous that yeah, we are not on track for this net zero emissions 2050. So we need to be basically much bolder as governments and companies, and much faster. So there's
the public as well, perhaps.
And the public, obviously. I mean, it's kind of to be, it's a joint challenge. It's not a challenge just for governments or just for companies. It's for society as a whole. And the reason, obviously, Michelle, I think that's becoming clearer now for everyone, is that, I mean, climate change is already there. It is happening. We see it around us in extreme weather events, and this is only going to get worse. And we should also bear in mind that that is also costly. Many people understandably make the point that, oh, what is going to be the cost of this energy transition? Yes, rightly so, and we need to do it in the most cost-effective way possible, obviously. But on the other hand, I always say, but don't think that doing nothing doesn't cost anything.
Oh, indeed.
Doing nothing means exactly doing nothing. The cost of inaction, as they call it, they are huge, and that's the climate change happening, and the adaptation that we need to do to adjust to a world that is getting warmer and warmer. Just ask the insurance companies, and you'll get the answers.
Indeed, and this isn't a new threat as well. There have been many nations that have been dealing for decades with the negative impact of climate change, and now it's becoming far more far more prevalent, and far more in the headlines. But that's certainly not to say that it hasn't been happening to communities for decades, whether it's droughts, whether it's flooding, and so on. Are there any surprises in this report for you? Is there anything when you were working on it, did anything pop up? Do you think, oh, actually, that's a trend that perhaps I hadn't anticipated, as strongly as it may be?
Well, Michelle, not really, because fortunately, I am also a peer reviewer of the World Energy Outlook, so I kind of already know what is coming in that sense.
That's what I mean. When you were looking, was there?
When I was going through it.
Yeah.
Well, yes, in the sense that I was pleasantly surprised that actually the change that is already happening, with the net zero emissions pledges of governments and companies, is already making more inroads than I had feared, so to speak. So we are kind of the good news part of change is happening. Also in the part that I am also looking at, of course, in more detail, the clean hydrogen part. So change is happening, and I mean the number of projects, for instance, in the hydrogen space, in the clean hydrogen space, is enormously. You're talking about announcements now of more than $1 billion of investments by the private sector, of announced projects on a weekly basis, of new projects. So the change that is already happening is more encouraging and is stronger than I had anticipated.
Well, that's because, I was going to ask, do you think it's too much talk and too little action at the moment, or do you think it's a case of giving companies and governments a second to breathe and to catch up amid this massive change? But it sounds very much like it's the second one.
It's not. I mean, definitely, as I said, change is happening in many domains. But again, as we said before, as we discussed before, the challenge or
is massive.
The things that we need to do is so enormous, and the pace that we need to develop as societies is so fast that we are definitely not doing that yet. But I have to say, there are many encouraging signs. You see the financial sector really, trying to get their heads around, what part are we going to play? You see the financial regulators, even the central banks stepping up to the plate of saying, we need to, do stress tests for banks so that, they have their climate risks under control, etc. So a lot of things are working in the same direction. And, last but not least, I'm an optimist. If so many, smart people, engineers in companies, including in companies that used to be, only fossil fuel based or only fossil fuel focused, indeed, they are changing now. And if so many smart people are thinking of how to make this net zero emissions world work, we're going to see a lot of innovation, things that you and I cannot imagine at the moment, but they will pop up sooner or later, and they will also deliver pleasant surprises. So I'm an optimist in terms of we can do a lot more if so many people are focused on this.
Well, let's very much hope that that's going to be the key message coming out of COP as well. Obviously, historically, a big trend for COP has been a lot of excitement in advance and tentative optimism, and there's sometimes quite a bit of disappointment afterwards that things haven't been achieved to the degree that people would hope they had been. And we've missed a year due to the pandemic. It's been a forced 2-year break, and I think it'll be very interesting to see the level of momentum that we get out of COP. Obviously, in an ideal world, it needs to be very strong, especially for the financial side, especially for the innovation side. Two key points that came out of the World Energy Outlook report as well. And with 130 or more than 130 nations now considering or setting a net zeros by mid-century, there's a lot of work to do. I'd like to just move on to I guess really the heart of your day today, which would be hydrogen. And you released an opinion piece for the IEA in 2018, October 2018, and perhaps many earlier as well, saying that clean energy is a missing link in the energy transition. Now, of course, hydrogen itself is far from new, but clean hydrogen is far more new. And looking at those headlines I mentioned again, some people are calling it the oil of the 21st century. Are they onto something, or do you think it's more its use, its future use, and its true value is more in that 20 to 30% of net zero abatement goals in those hard to reach places? Which camp would you be in? New oil of the 21st century, or invaluable as an abatement for 20 to 30%, or both maybe?
Well, it's a great question, Michelle. I think we need to be realistic in the sense that we don't really know yet how it will pan out, but we do know already one thing for sure, which is that basically the second part of what you were saying, it is going to be an indispensable contributor to achieve net zero emissions. Why? Not as a silver bullet that will solve all of our problems, but as an again indispensable contributor in addition to many other technologies, and particularly also electrification. So green electrification, electrification with much more solar, much more wind energy, much more hydro, etc. So this electrification trend, which is already happening, will definitely continue. All of the scenarios that IEA is working with, and other scenarios as well, IPCC, they are showing that. But there's a big but, which is that electrification cannot do the whole job.
No, of course.
So you have these so-called hard to abate sectors which you cannot easily electrify. You're talking particularly about heavy industry, chemicals, cement, steel, exactly, those kind of sectors. You're also talking about the heavy duty, long distance transportation, trucks that have to go very far. You're talking about ships, about trains, about planes, the difficult, so-called difficult to abate sectors, but also, long-term or medium-term energy storage. So the storage part of the energy transition is sometimes a little bit, underrated, but we need it if you have so much, intermittent generation from solar and from wind. You need to be able to bridge the hours, the days, but also it
also might just be a case there's so much progress going on. There's so many areas to focus on that, same with energy efficiency. Arguably, that does not get the spotlight that it very, very much needs. And an optimist perhaps would think, okay, well, there's just so much to focus on right now. We'll get to it. So there's only so much capacity for the hydrogen markets. Do you think that this growth of a clean hydrogen market this decade, so by 2030, the idea that the Middle East, for example, can be a global hydrogen hub, it can be a producer, and it can be a competitive exporter of clean hydrogen. Do you think that these sorts of plans are possible without putting a price on carbon, a more competitive global, not a global price, but a more competitive global pricing mechanisms in place?
Well, so those are kind of two different questions, Michelle. So the first one, let me try to tackle it in a more general way. So which is basically the message of IEA. IEA even before the World Energy Outlook came out early October, they published the first global hydrogen review.
Yeah.
And there they say, well, it's similar to what we talked about before. Yes, there's a huge potential, indispensable role, but we need to go much bolder and much faster.
Well, the Middle East plans at the moment on paper seem quite bold. To
advance, yes. But we need to do even more. So even the pipeline of all these projects is not enough if we need to deliver on the, or if we need to get on track for the net zero emissions, because we need to double hydrogen market as it is now, because as you may know, hydrogen is already used in industry, but it's mainly hydrogen from fossil fuels, particularly in refineries and ammonia production, etc. So, but it's all fossil fuels. So we need to decarbonize that. Plus, we need to penetrate with the low carbon hydrogen into new applications, as we discussed before, heavy duty transportation, other manufacturing industry parts. So that needs to happen. So that means doubling, according to what IEA is saying, to get to on track for net zero emission, we need to double that in the next decade, the total market,
so
and then sixfold up to 2050.
I mean, these are huge numbers. And how does a carbon price play into that? So the idea being, so to me, they're quite linked.
Carbon prices help.
They're quite linked.
Yes, but it's only one part. So
of course,
strong. That's what I was going to get to. How then IEA has a very long list, and I encourage everyone to read that chapter. I know it's a very long book. It's a big book, but if you tackle the executive summary and you take the last chapter on the policy recommendations, you have a very good overview also of what needs to happen. What needs to happen. So what needs to happen is a lot of things at the same time. So yes, we need to help bridge the cost gap, because low carbon hydrogen, of course, either from fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage or from electrolysis, so-called green hydrogen, is still more expensive, of course, than only from fossil fuels. So you need to bridge the cost gap. Well, the carbon price, of course, can be very important and can help bridge that cost gap significantly. For instance, if you have a high carbon price, like in Europe, that helps a lot.
Indeed.
But it's not enough. You need even also to ramp up, because we are in a hurry. You know, the world is a man in a hurry. We need to do so much at the same time. So we need to ramp up and define the market. What is the clean hydrogen market going to be in 2030? So you need strong demand signals, like, for instance, what the European Union is suggesting. You know, we need to decarbonize half of the industrial hydrogen, current hydrogen demand by 2030.
Yeah, it's a big goal.
We need to achieve a certain quota in marine applications, in aviation. So you need very, very strong signals on the supply side, also on the demand side.
Which is what the Middle East is missing at the moment.
Well, not only the Middle East. I mean, there's no single country that, you know, is managing to do this all at the same time. Of course, there are some front runners, luckily enough. I mean, Germany in Europe, very far ahead now. And the European Union, as I said, the Commission is very good.
So it's its own league now.
But I mean, in the Middle East, to come to your part on the Middle East can play a very significant role in being a provider, not only in helping to decarbonize, using hydrogen to decarbonize their own energy system and industrial system, but also to become a net exporter to those regions in the world that when they are successful, if they are successful in ramping up according to their strategies, their demand for hydrogen, they will not be able to supply it all themselves. Like currently with fossil fuels, Europe or others, Asia, Japan, Korea, they have to import most of their stuff for energy from, you know, the Middle East and other suppliers. It will not be much different in a decarbonized world. So
well, we're already seeing Germany talking to Saudi Arabia. We're seeing the UAE talking to India about potential tie-ups as well. We've obviously Saudi with the blue ammonia to Japan last year. So yes,
so it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity for the Middle East, for Saudi Arabia, who is already developing that with NEOM project, one of the really promising global flagship projects, which is really concrete and might already deliver before 2030 the first decarbonized hydrogen to Europe and also to Asia, but also UAE is making big strides. Oman and others may definitely,
and with the shipping side as well, exploring the value of hydrogen and shipping, because obviously the region is home to some of the world's, 𝗣𝗲𝗣𝗍 is the world's third largest bunkering hub, for example. So that's been a big focus area. And of course, when it comes to aviation, we all know the impact that has as well. Do you see the goals? Because I mean, you would have read, dozens and dozens and dozens. I've read about 30 roadmaps, hydrogen roadmaps, national hydrogen roadmaps. And what's really stood out to me is that, I mean, like I said, let's take Europe out of this. It's only completely in terms of ambition and detail and incentives and the structure provided and so on. But the others that I've read are so diverse, and in some have been 5 pages talking about, yes, hydrogen's important for all the reasons we've discussed as well. And yes, we're definitely going to look at it, and it's important. And then you'll have another roadmap on the other end of the scale, which is talking about specific investment figures. It's talking about specific import numbers that it wants to achieve by 2030, 2035, 2040, and so on. And so the level of variety in the roadmaps that have been produced so far, and of course, majority of nations haven't done that yet, but the level of variety in the ones that do exist, do you see that becoming, and this is it's not to put a negative slant on it, because it's excellent that they've done it. It's excellent that they're pursuing it and they've put pen to paper and they've made that effort when many nations haven't yet. But at the same time, do you think that level of variety in the current roadmaps later on in the 2020s could cause some problems? Because there's we're heading into a territory where there's still this lack of standardization. So we have this new market, excuse me, we have this new market essentially of clean hydrogen. As a globe, we have this potential ahead of us. We don't want to make the same mistakes that we've made with other markets, where we get 10, 20 years into it and they go, oh yes, we should have standardized. Oh yes, so did you see that being a potential risk for clean hydrogen in the 2020s?
It is a potential risk, but I mean, the good news is, Michelle, that's why that's really in the heart of the role for the organization that I'm chairing, or the network, I should say, that I'm chairing. It's an intergovernmental network, 𝗖𝗍𝗣𝗍𝗲, which is the oldest intergovernmental network in the world. It has all the major countries. We're talking 21 countries from Asia to Africa, North America, and Europe. All the major economies are in there. Basically, the G20 countries plus the Commission, and we are talking exactly about that. So early October, to give you one concrete example, the 𝗖𝗍𝗣𝗍𝗲 launched a proposal that was worked upon by a technical task force from the US, Japan, the Commission, Australia, France, the Netherlands, a proposal on how can we achieve a common methodology to calculate the carbon footprint of hydrogen production, whether you do it, from fossil fuels with CCUS, or you do it from electrolysis, some other pathways. So that is a very deliberate effort to avoid exactly what you were warning for us for, Michelle, that we have fragmentation. So we need to achieve, a global standard for how do you calculate this carbon footprint of hydrogen production. And on the basis of that, a certificates market at a global scale can develop. And we need common standards because, and like you say, off-takers that will be importing hydrogen from Australia or from Chile or from South Africa, they would want to know, okay, how clean is this clean hydrogen? what is the carbon footprint, and they might have their own ideas about what is acceptable and what's not. That's fine, that's up to the countries, but at least we need to know, that we have common standards about that. And that's, just one example. There are many others. So yes, you are right, we need common standards, but that's the good news is that is being acknowledged, and we are looking, not only looking, working very hard on a daily basis on these things. And so that's important also for Middle Eastern countries to get on board with these efforts and to engage in the consultations that are now taking place about these global standards, and to see and to get aligned with what is happening at a global scale.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much. So I really appreciate that. We've covered quite a bit. We've covered how the huge challenge that lies ahead of us, but that progress is going forward, and that you are positively surprised by that, which is great news on the review of the WEO during its development. Also, a really interesting figure about $1 billion per week coming through from private investors worldwide into hydrogen, which really does reflect the level of appetite in this market. The Hydrogen Council saying $500 billion as well in the pipeline, varying stages up to 2030 as well. So these are big figures. They're speaking very loudly, and then very much finding the importance of finding a common ground and a common methodology, which will help the market accelerate as well, and how the Middle East must be involved in that, and then how the carbon price and the importance of that, which we all know is not a silver bullet, but is also very instrumental in trying to get those finances flowing, not just within the energy markets and from energy investors, but perhaps most importantly from investors outside the energy world, who are also very much needed and need to have their confidence boosted in what may be uncharted territory for them coming into the energy transition. So thank you very much. You've covered so much for us in quite a short amount of time. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope also that you'll be able to join us again some point after COP, and we can digest what's been said there and hopefully everything that's been achieved.
With pleasure, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.